dog started barking before I even turned the corner of the kennel aisle. And it wasn't the normal kind of barking, where one dog sets off the rest. This was just one dog going nonstop, like it had been watching something for a while. And finally, couldn't ignore it anymore. I was working the night shift alone like usual. Because after the evening walks, a boarding kennel is mostly quiet checks and paperwork. When I reached the run, I saw it was the shepherd mix near the storage door. He stood stiff at the front of the kennel barking, past me toward the hallway behind my back. I turned around, expecting to see another dog loose, or maybe something near the back door, but the hallway was empty. I clipped a leash on him and took him outside to the yard. The moment we stepped out, he calmed down completely, like whatever bothered him had stayed inside. I walked him along the fence and brought him back in, and the second we crossed the kennel door, he started barking again, pulling toward the hallway this time. That's when I noticed the storage door was slightly open. That door leads to the side delivery lot, and it always stays shut overnight. I pushed it closed with my foot, and the latch clicked into place. The shepherd stopped barking right away. I put him back in his run and continued the checks until I reached the office and saw the clipboard by the door was missing. It always hangs on a hook, so we can log the last bathroom breaks. I looked around and found it lying on the floor halfway down the hallway where the shepherd had been staring earlier. My handwriting was still on the last entry, but the time beside it had been circled in pen that wasn't mine. I hung it back up and walked the kennel again, slower this time. Every gate was latched and every dog was inside. When I passed the shepherd again, he didn't bark. He just stood up and watched the hallway behind me again. I turned around and the storage door was open again, wider this time. I walked over and looked outside, but the side lot was empty except for trash bins and the fence. I shut the door and slid the bolt lock across the top. A second later, I heard a small metal clink deeper in the kennel that sounded exactly like someone testing a gate latch. I moved toward the middle row and saw a stainless water bowl rocking slowly like it had just been bumped. I didn't wait around after that. I went back to the office, locked the door, and pulled up the camera feeds. One camera showed the back hallway with the storage door. I watched it for a few seconds before realizing the door was slowly opening again, even though I had bolted it. Then a hand reached in from outside and pushed it the rest of the way. The camera only showed the hand and part of a sleeve, nothing else. I called the owner and the police while staying in the office. Officers searched the building and the yard, but nobody was there. No locks were broken, and nothing had been taken. The only thing they found was one kennel gate in the middle row, sitting half unlatched, just enough that a dog could push it open. The shepherd had been staring straight at that row the whole night. I quit the job 2 weeks later, but about a month after that, the owner called and asked if I had ever let someone shadow my night shifts before I left, because a new worker had reported the same thing happening again. Kennel gates loosened just enough to open, always during the hours when someone was alone. And the last thing he mentioned was that one of the dogs had started barking at the hallway, like it was watching someone walk past right before the storage door opened, and the camera aimed at it slowly turned toward the ceiling. Here's another story from someone working night shift. The first time I noticed the cameras were wrong happened during the 2 a.m. kennel check, when all the dogs suddenly went quiet at the same time, which never happens in a boarding place with 30 dogs, because at least one of them is always whining or scratching at a gate somewhere. That night, the building went completely silent, and I stood in the middle of the aisle for a few seconds, just listening, because the quiet felt wrong right away. The silence bothered me enough that I walked back to the office to look at the camera screens. We had 8 cameras covering the lobby, the hallways, and the outside yard. 7 feeds looked normal, while the kennel aisle camera was pointed straight at the ceiling. I leaned closer to the monitor thinking maybe the system had glitched, but the camera angle was clearly wrong, because it normally points straight down the row of kennels, so we can see if any dogs get loose overnight. Now the screen showed nothing except fluorescent lights and part of an air vent. I grabbed the step stool and walked down the aisle to fix it, since the camera mount is low enough to reach without tools. When I stepped under it, I noticed something strange right away, because the camera had already been tightened in place. Someone had turned the lens upward and locked it there on purpose. I loosened it and turned the lens back toward the kennels, tightened the mount again, and climbed down from the stool. The barking started again the moment my feet hit the floor, because every dog in the building began going off at once. I checked the hallway behind me thinking maybe someone had come in through the lobby, but the glass doors were still locked and nothing looked disturbed. Then I heard the soft click of the side entrance door opening somewhere behind me. I walked over slowly and looked through the small window, but nobody was outside. The parking lot lights were on, and the road gate was still closed. I shut the door again and locked the deadbolt just to be safe. When I turned around, the barking stopped again. Almost instantly, that pattern made me uneasy, so I went back to the office and checked the camera screens again. The kennel aisle camera was pointed at the ceiling again. I stared at the monitor, trying to understand that, because I had fixed it less than a minute earlier. Then something moved in the lower corner of the screen. It was just a shadow sliding across the edge of the frame, like someone walking directly under the camera. I left the office and stepped back into the aisle, but the walkway was empty. 3 kennel doors were slightly open. They were not open wide enough for the dogs to escape, but they were loose enough that one strong push would have done it. I shut them and latched them tight before walking back toward the office again. Halfway there, I heard the metal yard gate rattle at the far end of the building. That gate leads to the fenced exercise yard where the dogs go during the day, and nobody should have been out there at that hour. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk and walked down to check it. The yard looked empty when I stepped outside, but the chain on the gate had been unhooked. I clipped it back into place and turned around to head inside. The kennel aisle lights shut off behind me at that exact moment. The building uses motion lights overnight, but they normally stay on when someone is walking through the hallway. Now the entire row went dark, except for the office light at the far end. I walked back slowly, and when I got near the office door, I noticed something different on the monitor again. The kennel aisle camera was pointing down the row like it should, but the angle looked slightly lower than before, like someone shorter than me had been the one to adjust it. I called the owner and explained what was happening, and he told me to lock the office door and stay inside until morning. The police showed up around 3 and searched the entire property. They did not find anyone inside the building or outside the fence line, but they did find something else in the system logs. One of the spare employee badges had been used on the side entrance reader several times that night. The badge belonged to a worker who had quit 3 months earlier. The part that bothered everyone was the timestamps, because every swipe happened during the same minutes when the camera had been pointed up at the ceiling. I stopped working night shifts after that night. About a week later, the owner called and asked if I had come back to the building after quitting, because the same badge had been used again overnight. I told him I had not been anywhere near the place. He checked the drawer where the spare badges were kept while we were on the phone and said the badge was still sitting inside it. The drawer was still locked like before. I thought that was the end of it until a month later, when one of the new night workers messaged me asking how often the kennel aisle camera used to get turned toward the ceiling. I asked why he was asking, and he said the same thing had happened during his shift. He fixed the camera and went back to the office. When he checked the screen again a minute later, the camera was pointed up again, and all the dogs had gone silent. He told me he walked into the aisle to fix it a second time and heard someone move somewhere between the kennels, even though every run was closed. He said he finished the shift in the office after that. The last thing he wrote before I stopped replying was that it only seems to happen on nights when someone is alone in the building.